All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. I hope that you are here and interested in making sure that you've got your wine and your cheese. I got my, there we go, get yourself some cheese and have that ready at the ready. This replaces our annual historic preservation reception. Let me go ahead and pull up my slides here. So there is our wine and cheese. So again, make sure our slides are moving the right direction. So this is a past worth preserving. This is Preservation Month in Prince George's County. As you probably know, the annual Historic Preservation Month reception has been a tradition for a very long time in Prince George's County. We are as sad as anybody else that we're not able to have it this year. At least we were able to bring you some updates virtually this way. This is not going to include the annual awards that typically get presented at this particular program. This is more just an update type of program. We have several different speakers, and we have several different sponsors of this program. We have Prince George's County Historical Society with us tonight, University of Maryland, the Prince George's County Parks and Record Department, as well as the Prince George's County Planning Department with us as well. And so we're just going to go ahead and jump into it. Again, you are on mute. We can't hear you. If you have somehow managed to figure out a way around that system, I will end up muting you. The program is being recorded and will be available about 36 hours after this presentation. We will post it on our YouTube channel and share out the link. Additionally, the item about questions, please, if you have questions, we would love for you to post them in our question box, and we would be more than happy to answer them there. We are very much happy to have you even post things that just say your name and your who you're maybe with, and that you're kind of just checking in. That way we get a little bit of a moment of seeing some of our colleagues that we would normally see at our Preservation Month reception. So we are thrilled to have, I get to see the attendee list on this side. So there's plenty of people that I know on this list, and welcome to each and every one of you. It's a strange and unique time to have this sort of conversation. Again, wine and cheese. All right, we're going to start with Donna Schneider, and she is the president of the Prince George's County Historical Society. And let me, I'll unmute her. And Donna, we're going to get you up on screen for just a minute. And let's see here. Oops. One more time.
I'm clicking share my webcam.
No.
No?
All right. Well, if it doesn't work this time, then we'll move along with it. We can see you on the screen, and oh, there you are. Okay. Now you can wave to the audience, and I will disappear. And then in a moment, you can go ahead and turn off your screen whenever you're ready for your presentation.
Okay. So good evening. As Aaron said, my name is Donna Schneider, and I am the president of the Prince George's County Historical Society. And I'd also like to add my welcome to tonight's Prince George's County virtual Historic Preservation Month reception, and thank you for joining us. The Historical Society, we continue to be busy. We're responding to electronic research inquiries that have been received in our library email account. That's info@pghistory.org if you have a question for us. We're doing collaborative research on major projects with several university scholars as well. Me, as well as all the rest of the library volunteers, we're very anxious to have the Frederick DeMar Library reopen so we can welcome everybody to do research, and just those that are interested in county history. Unfortunately, don't know exactly when that'll be, but hopefully that'll be soon. We are putting together a virtual lecture series, hopefully for the remainder of the summer. We're doing that in connection with Maryland Milestones. And it'll be, the first one will be presented by our historian, Susan Pearl, who will be discussing the Borough Diaries, which were written during the Civil War by a plantation owner that lived here near Upper Marlboro. The lecture is going to be held on Thursday, June 18th at 7 p.m. As soon as we finalize all the details, notifications will be sent out to society members, as well as put on various social media platforms, as well as I know Maryland Milestones will be publicizing it as well. And we do have additional lectures, which we're working on setting up dates for those as well. And as soon as we get that information, we'll share it with everybody. We are appreciative of our continuing partnership with the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission on various lectures and event series. We are hoping to continue with some of these lectures that we've partnered with in the past later this fall, as well as we are already planning to reschedule some of the events for this year, for next year. And I hope you'll be able to join us when that happens. Another exciting piece of news I actually learned today is that the Amen Trust is working on a new proposal for the restoration of Bostwick, a historic home in the town of Bladensburg. Once we get new information on that, we'd love to share the details with everybody. I got to put in a plug. As with other nonprofits, the Historical Society is always looking for and in need of volunteers. We have a variety of projects that we can always use an extra pair of hands with. If you'd like to be involved in any way, please feel free to reach out to us. Again, thank you for joining us this evening, and I would like to now turn it over to Tom Gross.
Okay. Well, that's me, or at least it looks a little bit something like me, if not exactly. I guess we're all going through lockdown in our own little ways. So thank you very much. I'm going to assume that I am on screen now. I don't, okay, there we go. Show my screen. I'm going to bring up my presentation here if you give me just a moment. 1 second here. And let's see if I can bring that up. And I'm just going to assume, unless Aaron wants to unmute himself and just give me confirmation that the slides are up, I'm going to assume they are up.
You are. You're good.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much, Aaron. And thank you, Donna, for that introduction. Again, my name is Tom Gross. I am with the Historic Preservation section of Prince George's County Planning Department. And I'm going to go first here in terms of presentations. And what I have for you this evening is called Preservation Planning in Prince George's County, the Year in Review. Now, preservation planning is kind of a gauzy term, but what I've used it for is kind of a catch-all for all the different kinds of work that we do in Prince George's County in the planning department related to historic preservation. In the section, we kind of serve a dual purpose. We are staff to the County Historic Preservation Commission, of which Donna Schneider is a member, of which Aaron Marcavitch is a member. I pass along greetings from the chair of the HPC, John Peter Thompson. He could not be with us this evening, but he does send along his well wishes for the evening. So what I'm going to do, and again, on my screen, I can't see if I'm showing up. You may still see my picture, and that's fine. I guess I will just, if I unshare it, maybe my presentation gets bigger, so I'll do that.
I went ahead and turned off your webcam.
Okay,
so you're
terrific.
Nice and big.
Thank you. So again, I think I'll start by just kind of giving you an idea of where we are now in terms of historic properties in Prince George's County. At current count, we've got 452 locally designated historic sites, 92 unclassified historic resources, 4 locally designated historic districts, 100 National Register listings, these are individual properties, as well as 17 National Register historic districts, and 6 National Historic Landmarks in the county. And this is where I really wish I could turn this into a trivia night, because I'd love for people to be able to buzz in and tell me what those 6 National Historic Landmarks are. But maybe, I'm sure some of you know, some of you may have to give it some thought. Anyway, So that's where things are now. So what I want to do is just talk about what we have done as a historic preservation program over the past year. And I want to start, excuse me, by talking about new historic site designations. It's one of the things that we really like, even though it ultimately creates kind of more work in our portfolio. One of the responsibilities and the authorities of the Historic Preservation Commission is to designate properties as historic sites and thus put them under the protection of the county's historic preservation ordinance. So in the past year or so, I had to reach back a little bit more than a year, but we've had 3 properties that have been designated as historic sites by the county's Historic Preservation Commission. So first off was the Asbury Methodist Episcopal Church and Cemetery in Brandywine. The HPC designated this as a historic site last March. The building the original portion of the building was constructed in 1906 on or near the site of an earlier church that was constructed in 1876. The adjacent cemetery contains approximately 80 marked graves and an unknown number of unmarked graves. Among the families that are represented in the cemetery are the Brooks, Moore, Pinckney, Sharp, Duckett, and Worthy families. The congregation was very enthusiastic about this designation, and it came about because they applied for a permit to install a new sign, a relatively simple task, but it did require us to evaluate what had been an unclassified historic resource to determine whether it should be a historic site. In this case, we made the determination, the HPC did, that it should be elevated to that status. Another property that was previously an unclassified historic resource, now a historic site, is Star Potts Hall in Mount Rainier. This was designated in June of last year. It was built by Robert Potts in 1909 and used for a variety of community purposes during his period of ownership. It was then purchased in 1921 by a local chapter of the Order of the Eastern Star, and they owned it for almost 90 years until 2010. Since that time, the building has been owned by the city of Mount Rainier. It is adjacent to their existing city hall, which you can sort of see in the background there in the lower picture. And the reason this came to us is because the city would like to make alterations to this building to incorporate it into their new municipal center. So it was designated, and the work that they were contemplating has now been approved through the historic area work permit process. Okay, in September of last year, the HPC designated the Washington, Baltimore, and Annapolis Electric Railway Bridge in Bowie. This structure was built in 1907 to carry the WB&A Electric Railway over Horsepen Branch, just a little south of Old Town Bowie. It's constructed of reinforced concrete and rests on heavy concrete abutments and retaining walls that flank the waterway. The railway tracks were removed in the 1930s, and the bridge is now located along the WB&A bike and pedestrian trail near Laurel Bowie Road. It's one of the county historic sites that is owned by the commission, owned by the Department of Parks and Recreation. And so later on, you'll be hearing from Ed Day from the Parks Department. So anything that happens with this site going forward, we will coordinate with the Parks Department. Excuse me. Now, this last one was just on the HPC's agenda in April. And you'll see that it says recommended for designation April 2020. This property was evaluated per a request that actually came from the property owner. This is something authorized under the county's historic preservation ordinance. A property owner can apply to be evaluated for historic site designation. The way the process works is the HPC makes a recommendation, and the matter is decided finally by the district council following a joint public hearing with the planning board. So we've had the HPC recommendation, and we will have a joint public hearing in the coming months in advance of hopefully designation of this house as a historic site. The house was built in 1934. You can see it's a Tudor revival structure. We were very lucky to find an original photo from when the house was first constructed. It was first owned by Lester and Myrtle Teed, which you see down there. Interesting story about them. Mr. Teed drew a ticket on a favorite in the 1935 Grand National Horse Race in England. The horse horse's name was Tapanois, who was expected to do well. Mr. Teed actually sold the ticket to a gambler from New York the day before the race. The day of the race, the horse fell, so he did not even place. So the gambler was out his $18,000, but Mr. Teed was up $18,000. And I happen to think, since it was fairly soon before he bought the house, that maybe it's one of the reasons that he bought the house, because he had the money for it. Okay, so those are the 3 historic sites that the HPC has designated over the past year, and then this one that's still gestating, I guess. One of the other things that the HPC does is it reviews National Register Historic District nominations and National Register individual listing nominations in its role as a certified local government. And there have been 2 district nominations that have come through the HPC over the past year. The first was Cheverly. The Mayor and Town Council of Cheverly initiated this in 2018, leveraging funds made available through the Planning Department's Planning Assistance to Municipalities and Communities program. We in the Historic Preservation section provided technical assistance, including research support. The proposed district encompasses 226 acres and includes 557 contributing residential properties built in a range of styles, including Colonial Revival, Gothic Revival, Tudor Revival, Craftsman Bungalow, Spanish Mission, which you see there, and modest vernacular forms. The proposed district is considered eligible for the register on a local level in the area of community planning and development and in the area of architecture. So that was one district nomination that the HPC processed. The other is in the Moyone Reserve down in Accokeek. The Moyone Association initiated this in 2019 with a portion of the funding provided by the HPC's non-capital grant program, which I'll speak about in a few minutes. The proposed district encompasses approximately 1,300 acres. You can see on the map there that some of it actually spills over into Charles County, so that's not of real direct concern to us. But nevertheless, the bulk of it is within Prince George's. There are 133 contributing resources. Many of the houses in the reserve were constructed in a modern, or what you might call mid-century style, designed by several architects, the most prolific of whom was Charles Wagner. Wagner designed nearly 20 houses between 1946 and 76, including his own, which you see on the top there, and the Odell House. Both of those are individually designated as historic sites now. The proposed district is eligible for the register on the national level in the area of conservation for its role in the protection of the viewshed from Mount Vernon across the river, and at the state level in the area of community planning and development, and at the local level in the area of architecture. So those that's another aspect of the work that we do and that the HPC does, is processing National Register nominations, even if they originate from elsewhere, as these 2 did. Okay, I want to move on to the Historic Property Grant Program, which we are very proud of. And my colleague Daniel Tanna is the manager of that. And if you have gotten a grant, then I'm over the past few years, and you've worked with Daniel. The program was started back about 12 years ago, and it's organized around a yearly competitive application and selection process. Funding is provided through an appropriation by the County Council. For the current cycle, we had $300,000 available with a maximum award set at $50,000. We'll see what happens with that in the coming years, but we make the argument that the program really has made a powerful impact on the ability of private historic site owners to steward their properties. So we're hoping that funding will continue in a robust fashion going forward. The HPC, excuse me, reviews the applications. A subcommittee reviews them, and then the HPC makes recommendations, which are then finalized by the planning board. In this most recent round, which the HPC acted on in February, and the planning board then finalized with minor modifications in March, 10 properties were awarded the $300,000 available, and you can see a list of them there and the awards. The program strives for geographic diversity and resource type diversity, but it really does vary from year to year. I just wanted to highlight a few of the projects that receive funding through this latest round. First is that yellow house there is the Berwyn Heights School. They received about $11,000 for exterior repainting. The Frederick and Frances Watkins House in Bowie received about $41,000 for a range of exterior rehabilitation, including chimney rebuilding, roof repair, window repair, and exterior repainting. Bel Air Mansion in Bowie received $38,000 for repair and rehabilitation of their south portico, and the Cheltenham Methodist Church and Cemetery received just shy of $26,000 for window repair and exterior repainting. We're happy not only to get these awards out the door, but we're also happy when work actually is done. And Daniel tells me that since June 1st of last year, so in about the last year, we have reimbursed $305,553.59 worth of work funded through the grant program. So that's great. And I just wanted to highlight one of the projects here. This is the E.E. Clark House in Mount Rainier. They received a grant for a fairly comprehensive campaign of exterior rehabilitation, including the removal of the stucco and rehabilitation of the underlying original wood siding. So we were excited with this project and that it turned out as well as it did. So this program is continuing, and as I said, hopefully we will have another big pot of money for it in the year ahead. Now, we also have a non-capital grant program, and this is fairly new. This was established in 2017 and took a couple years to kind of rev up. But the purpose of this program is to provide seed money for historic preservation projects that are not of the brick and mortar variety, but more things like planning, interpretation, and programming. The program offers mini grants up to $5,000, which require no match from the applicant, as well as larger grants up to $25,000, which require a 50% match. And this program is open to nonprofits, municipalities, and individuals. So far we have processed, and the HPC has approved 4 applications for the non-capital grant program. The first I talked about earlier. This is the Moyone Reserve documentation. The association received funds to retain a consultant to conduct research and document properties in the Moyone to support their National Register Historic District. Aaron knows this one. The Anacostia Trails Heritage area received $20,000 to hire a consultant to conduct, oh, I'm sorry, I'm going out of order here. This is the Greenbelt Theater. They received $12,000 to hire an architect to create plans and drawings for a Prince George's County Film Center in the space adjacent to the old Greenbelt Theater, develop a multimedia Maryland movie history exhibit, and to produce walking tour maps and Greenbelt tourism brochures. And actually, Aaron knows about this as well because I believe ATHA provided some support for this project too. Okay, the ATHA project, they received funds to hire a consultant to conduct a feasibility study to assess the potential challenges and benefits of expanding their current boundaries, which you see there on the left, to include other portions of Prince George's County, as you see represented in the map on the right. And then lastly, just recently, the HPC approved a non-capital grant for the Town of Upper Marlboro's Historical Committee and the Town of Upper Marlboro itself to hire an IT contractor to migrate their existing residential their historic district walking tour into a interactive walking tour application. So we're happy to see that this program is attracting interest, and hopefully that will continue. I just want to briefly mention what is probably, well, what definitely is our most widely used preservation incentive, which is the county's preservation tax credit. Generally, this is worth 25% of approved rehabilitation expenses. So you do a project that's approved that costs you $100,000, you may get a $25,000 property tax credit that you can spread over 10 years. And just quickly, just the top line number over the past year, the HPC has approved tax credits for 14 properties, totaling $113,239. Now that's the credit amount. So the actual work involved would be 4 times that. Just a couple of the projects here highlighted: Claggett House at Cool Spring Manor. They've received multiple tax credits. for exterior rehabilitation. And then you also see here the barn at the Beechwood property, which was relocated and comprehensively rehabilitated. So just a couple of projects there to highlight with the tax credit. I now want to move to archaeology, and this consumes, I don't want to say a lot of our time, because really it all falls to Dr. Jennifer Stabler, our archaeology master planner in this section, who reviews every development application that comes into the department for potential impacts on archaeological resources, which as you could imagine, could involve every property in the county. So it certainly keeps her busy, but I did ask Jennifer if she could provide just a few highlights over the past year of archaeological investigations that have come out of the development review process. So here's just a few. Starting up at Toping Castle in Greenbelt. This was the site of the Walker family plantation. The foundation was identified a few years ago when an earlier development plan was submitted but did not go forward. A new development plan is being proposed. Additional investigations have been recommended, and it's expected that the site of the house, which no longer stands, will be proposed to be preserved in place when a development plan is submitted. And I'm sort of going from north to south if you follow along on the map there. Moving down to Glendale, this is the Traditions at Beachfield project. The property will be developed as a continuing care facility at the intersection of Route 50 and Enterprise Road. The property contains a late 18th to early 20th century house site and a 19th century site that may be the remains of a slave cabin that was converted to a tenant house. 2 cemeteries have been identified, one of which is believed to be a slave cemetery, and it's expected, of course, that this will be preserved in place within the development. Shouldn't say of course, it is expected to be preserved in place. The Mill Branch site in Bowie, this is located on the north side of Mill Branch Road in Bowie. It appears to be a plantation dating to the 18th century with identified features including a house site and several outbuildings. Archaeological investigations are ongoing. Jennifer was actually out there this morning, and those are expected to wrap up this week. And further analysis of the artifacts that are being collected could tell us a lot about what was being manufactured on the site when it was operating. Going down just a little bit to Locust Hill, this is adjacent to St. Barnabas Church in Leland, which you see up there with the blue icon. What you see circled down there in red is this little wooded knoll. This is 1938 aerial. And through her research, Jennifer suspected that this might be a cemetery. And this was actually confirmed through additional excavations. So we know that there is a cemetery there, and this will be preserved in place within the proposed development. Going over to the Oxon Hill area, the Harborview property includes the Butler House Historic Site, which is associated with a family of free African Americans from the 19th century, the Butlers, and is adjacent to the Mount Welby Historic Site on the National Park Service's Oxon Cove property. No development application has been submitted yet, but there was an initial archaeological survey that was conducted and identified 3 sites, including one near the Butler House, which may have been occupied by free African American families that settled in the area prior to the Civil War. These could include the Hatton family, which you see there to the north of the Butler residence. The Hattons helped to establish St. Paul's United Methodist Church in Oxon Hill. Moving on to Brandywine, one property in Brandywine. This is the Branch Avenue MXT project. The developer, in exploring the property, submitted photographs of a cemetery that was unknown to our office. Subsequent archaeological investigations identified a late 18th to mid 19th century house site near the cemetery. So both the house and the cemetery are associated with the William Townsend family. And it is expected that both the cemetery and the house site will be preserved as open space. And lastly, one more archaeological highlight is Calm Retreat down in Brandywine, just north of the border with Charles County. A dense housing development is proposed on this former agricultural property. It contains the house of William T. Robinson, which was constructed shortly before the Civil War. The Robinsons were slave owners, and a tenant house, which you see circled in red there, which no longer stands. This is a 1968 photo. But this tenant house site is thought to have been a slave cabin that was later converted to a tenant house. So archaeological investigations have been conducted. The draft phase 2 report from that study has been submitted, and so Jennifer will be looking at that to see what kind of conclusions the archaeologists on site were able to reach. So those are some archaeological highlights from the past year. Before I move on from the archaeology world, I do want to also note another initiative that Jennifer works on is the documentation of cemeteries throughout the county. This is good not only to increase our knowledge base about things that we can't really see and in some cases are not marked at all, but really could help inform future development review. It's great to know as much as we can about these cemeteries and the people that are buried there. So Jennifer works on this whenever she can and whenever more urgent matters aren't pressing. Which is a good segue to this other initiative that I want to finish my presentation on. I was thinking about things that are kind of outside of our normal day-to-day work that we spend time on. One of them is the Prince George's Modern project. This initiative grew out of the 2010 update to the county's historic sites and districts plan, and really a recognition that architecture of the mid-20th century is, I guess you'd say, underappreciated relative to other forms of architecture, and thus more vulnerable to demolition. So the purpose of Prince George's Modern is to identify properties of this style, of this vintage, and explore their architectural and cultural significance as hopefully a first step towards at least increasing awareness of their merits, if not fostering some kind of efforts toward their preservation. Over the past year, staff has documented or photo documented approximately 20 additional properties. Taking pictures is the fun and sort of the easy part. The real work comes in where we take those properties and we extensively research them and submit completed documentation to MHT. So sort of like Jennifer with her cemetery documentation, staff, mostly Tyler Smith, is working on this now, and it's done kind of as time allows. But fortunately, we've also been able to contract out some of the documentation, excuse me, to firms that do that kind of work. So that's great. We've got north of 100 properties that we've documented in some fashion with Prince George's Modern. So with that, I just want to return to this image and kind of pose the rhetorical question of where we're going to be a year from now. So as I said, we've got 452 locally designated historic sites. That's going to go up, I'm sure, by a little bit. And the number of unclassified historic resources will go down, either because properties are elevated to historic site status or determined to be not eligible and removed from the historic resources inventory. We have 4 locally designated historic sites. I don't expect that to change. There are occasionally rumblings about new or reanimated efforts at creating new local historic districts. Might be another National Register listing or two that comes through the HPC. Hopefully that number of National Register historic districts will go up to 19 with the addition of Cheverly and the Moyone Reserve. And I doubt that the number of National Historic Landmarks is going to change. I think it's going to stay at, let's see if I can remember, Riversdale, Montpelier, the NASA facility, and Greenbelt, and the Accokeek Creek site, and His Lordship's Kindness. I think I got them all there. So those are the 6 National Register landmark, National Historic Landmarks. I cheated. I looked them up yesterday. So, sorry about that. So who knows where we're going to be? I can just say that even in this current situation, just like Donna said with the Historical Society, we are continuing kind of full speed ahead. Things have not slowed down for us very much. We are still reviewing development applications, still evaluating properties for potential historic site status. And so we're carrying on for as long as this situation persists. And I will just leave with one final slide here, which is just the website for the Historic Preservation section and my email address. And I'll just say, joining us tonight, although not speaking, I was deputized to speak, but we do have, maybe during the Q&A, if there's questions that I don't want to answer or can't answer, we do have Jennifer Stabler with us, and Daniel Tanna, who can speak about the grant program. We've got Tyler Smith, who can speak about the Prince George's Modern Program, and we've got, of course, Howard Berger, our fearless leader, our section supervisor, who can talk about all of those things and more. And I don't want to leave out Ashley Hall, our planning technician, who can talk about how we all, how she helps us all do our jobs and stay focused on what we have to do when we have to do it. So with that, I will close it out and turn it back to Aaron.
Thank you, Tom. Really appreciate it. All right, we're going to go ahead and change over here to our main slideshow. Here we go. And jump on to Dennis. Dennis is the Interim Director of the University of Maryland Preservation Program. And we're going to unmute him and send a, send webcam request. There he is. And Dennis, we're going to give you the panelist, so you should be getting a notice that you can share your screen.
Great.
Again, if folks have questions, please send them in the box. I know that we've had some intermittent issues with audio, and unfortunately on our side, there's not much we can do about it. But this, again, will be recorded, and you can check it out on YouTube after if you missed it. So Dennis, on to you.
Great, thank you, Aaron. Hopefully you can see my slides. Yes?
Yes, you're good to go.
Terrific. And thank you, Tom. And I was very happy to hear the list of names of folks working at MNC PPC, because many of them are University of Maryland Historic Preservation graduates, as is Tom. So we're always very happy to see our folks get jobs and to support preservation in Maryland. So, and I'm very happy to be here tonight to essentially give you just an update of some of the student activities over the last school year. And so I'm going to talk about some ongoing projects, and then I'll focus on a new project that we just did last fall that was done in cooperation with MNC PPC as well. Okay, there we go. So starting off with some ongoing things, over the last several years, we've been working with the local folks in finding ways for our students to have opportunities to learn and refine their skills by looking at the local historic resources. So Compton-Bassett is a wonderful field laboratory for us, and Ed Day and Brian Carroll and folks there have been very helpful and very cooperative. And so I have been bringing my building conservation class there for a number of years to look at the buildings. And then more recently, with a vernacular architecture course, we've been going to Compton-Bassett to give students the opportunity to refine their field measuring skills. So that's what you see on the left, a group of students who are measuring the dairy, the 18th century dairy at Compton-Bassett, and they all then use these use this documentation to prepare drawings for the building. So this is an important, obviously an important skill for any historic preservation student to have, and so we're very, very happy to be able to take advantage of these really interesting and important local historic resources to allow them to refine their skills. Another house that we've had a long-term relationship with is the Bostwick House in Bladensburg, and the university has a cooperative agreement with the city of Bladensburg. We use the house as a classroom for building conservation, vernacular architecture. We use it as a field resource to examine an interesting and important early structure. And we have, especially Don Linebaugh, who has been involved with this project for probably 15 years now, works very closely with the city of Bladensburg on projects to help to restore the property. Those have included a number over the years. We've received, the city has received, with the support of the university, grants to repair the windows, to repair the porch on the front of the house, to do a variety of projects. The picture that you can see on the left is from the early 20th century, and so it demonstrates, number one, that the house has had a long history of problems. You can see the porch that is only partially there, but I'll call your attention to the slanting structure on the left. This is the buttress, and this was installed actually very early. The house was built in 1746. The buttress, we think, was added within just a few decades after the construction of the house to shore it up, because the house, unfortunately, the designers made a number of structural engineering errors, and so the buttress is needed to keep that very, very tall gable end wall in place. And unfortunately, the buttress has suffered a number of damages to it over the years. Bostwick has been, unfortunately, has suffered from the derecho, from the earthquake, from a variety of things over the years, and the most recent one is the buttress. So on the right, you can see the buttress. It has lost its roof covering, and so it has exposed the brick interior. So the city of Bladensburg has been able to secure a grant to repair and replace that buttress. So now this is just a little bit of intrusion on that discussion to talk about digital documentation. So on the right is a digital image of the buttress as it is currently being worked on. And on the left, you see Stefan Wolke, who's a PhD student at the university and has been teaching a course in digital documentation for a number of years. We've been working with Stefan and have really been expanding our skills and presence in digital documentation. So on the left, you see a part of an 18th century sailing vessel that was excavated along the wharf in Alexandria. And we were brought in to digitally scan that piece of the vessel so that they would have as the most accurate documentation of it as is possible. And so we have been doing pro bono projects in the region, and we hope to expand that effort. And so one of them is at Bostwick. So the image at the right is was taken from a laser scan of the buttress during its demolition. And this image shows two more scans of the buttress. So the buttress is going to be completely removed and then replaced because it needs to have, the building needs to have the structural support that the buttress has provided, but the existing structure has been determined to be inadequate for that purpose. So we are working with the Maryland Historical Trust, the city of Bladensburg, and others to document the buttress, remove the buttress so that a replacement can be installed in the near future. So, so those are the ongoing projects that we've been involved with for a number of years. And I'd like to finish up now with a review of a new project that we were very happy to have undertaken last fall. So the PALS program, which is Partnerships in Something or Other and Something or Other, I can't ever remember the acronym. It's a cooperative arrangement between the university and local governments throughout Maryland. And starting last year, we established a relationship with Prince George's County and the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. And so we were able to undertake a project through PALS in our studio project last year. The idea behind our studios are that they are meant to be community projects. We look for a client. We look for someone who has a preservation problem that we can use as the basis for a semester-long studio. And you can see the participants here. We had 8 students last fall. The instructor was Paul Anasta, who is a PhD student in the Historic Preservation Program. The idea behind these studios are that the students get the opportunity to work on a real world problem and with real world solutions and products at the end. And so this was we think, a very successful effort that we undertook last year. So I'm just going to give you a brief review of that project, talk about what we tried to accomplish and what the outcomes were. So the project focused on some traditional communities in southern Prince George's County, the Aquasco Woodville area, which is a very old community that extends back to the 17th century and has a number of very significant historic properties that survive. And in addition to Aquasco Woodville, there are two traditional but recent African-American communities, Eagle Harbor and I forget the other one at the moment, that were resort communities that were established in the early 20th century. So the members of those three communities had approached MNCPPC with a request that research be done to enrich the story of these communities and to help the community members to tell that story in a variety of ways. So we agreed that this would be a perfect opportunity for our students to be involved and undertook that beginning last September. Cedar Haven Hotel here, shown on the left, is an example of the early 20th century resort architecture that was located there. And because it was a resort, there were a number of very interesting local industries, ice cream vendors, and the sort that grew up about the community. Both of these communities are in decline, and so the fear was that the intangible heritage that is represented by their stories was going to be lost. And so our job was to go in and develop a strategy for trying to capture that history and present it in a way that we thought would reflect the history of the community and support their goals. So the students undertook a variety of methods, site visits, went to the area and examined the structures, did documentary research of various kinds, and even went out. This is a mill, the remnant ruins of a grist mill in the area that the students documented and are preparing an MIHP form for as well. We interviewed community members, and really one of the major goals of this studio is to get students out into the community, to interact with them, to learn what their concerns are, and to be able to get that experience. We feel that our preservation students, that's really the main thing that they need to learn during their time with us. They need to learn how they can work with communities for the benefit of all. So this was a wonderful opportunity for that, and the local folks in these areas were very responsive. We had a number of community meetings where we were able to interact with them and to learn their stories and to try to learn from them as well what they thought was most important about the history of these areas. So we looked at different themes. So certainly reaching back to the history of the area, tobacco and Reconstruction was a major theme. Religion, many local churches in the area have been very, very strong, benchmarks of community life for a long period of time, and it was very clear that that story was very important. Similarly, education, a number of schools go way back, certainly long before the days of desegregation, and the idea that those stories needed to be retained, preserved, and disseminated. And then finally, the resort towns. The two resort towns that were created in the early 20th centuries, they were aimed at meeting the needs of African Americans, primarily who were living in Washington, D.C., and providing them a safe haven for them to come and enjoy, beach life. And so again, those stories were the ones that we focused on. The products. So again, working with the community and finding out from them what they thought would be most beneficial, and then working to develop and to assess the resources that we had available to us to try to develop actual, actionable products, things that could be developed that would help to tell that story. So we came up with 4. One was a trail guide, one was a route map, site markers and theme kiosks, as well as an audio tour. So all of these are based on historical research, community outreach, oral histories, to try to identify what were the central stories in the area that we could use as the basis for these presentations. So the trail guide talks about the changing landscapes, goes back in time, looking at the farmsteads, the early agricultural history of the area, and then tracing that forward to the resort towns that were established in the early 20th century, Cedar Haven and Eagle Harbor. I see it written there, so now I can remember them. And then, of course, those have primarily declined, and so the story of what has happened in the area in that time afterward. So we identified the following 19 sites that were viewed as being particularly noteworthy, both historically in terms of their preservation, but also in the stories that they have to tell. So the students rigorously researched these 19 sites, and then they became the basis for the content for the tours that we developed. You can see here the route map. And so this is aimed to be a flyer that an individual can pick up and can use and take with them as they explore the area. And you see the different sites that have been identified, and all of them have a short historical description of them, and as well as, and these are also indicated on the audio tour as well. The kiosks, these are physical representations that will hopefully be located at different points along the trail. So you can see here the students, this is a mock-up of one of the kiosks that the students developed. So on the right, you see the actual structure of the kiosk. And on the left, this is an example of a storyboard that would be printed on the kiosk so that when visitors come by, this is the information that they can see. The site markers, so the 19 sites that I mentioned before, each one of them is marked, and here's an example, 2 examples of the information that is provided, for each of the sites. And finally, the audio tour, which was developed and was aimed at trying to provide a different flavor to the story. So the different elements, the site tour, the audio tour, the brochure, all of those are aimed at telling this story the best that they can given the media that they are produced in. So obviously an audio tour provides the opportunity, for actual speech, to hear the stories from the actual voices, mouths of the community members, to include music from local musical groups who were important in the area. So the idea was that all of these elements, an individual can take advantage of one of them, but hopefully if they take advantage of multiples, that they're going to get a richer, more in-depth story of this community. So what did we learn? So the important thing for the students was that they worked as a team. They generated a collaborative product, a real product, and they were able to develop, creative, effective methods of telling the story of the 3 communities. We hope that the community has benefited as well, and we had a number of community meetings and presentations, and the feedback that we received from community members, I must say, was universally positive, and they really are looking to find ways to implement these ideas in the near future. And acknowledgements, many people were involved. I've already mentioned the PALS program, Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, but you can see that there are many other folks involved as well. So I would like to conclude with that. So just would like to say again that we really value the opportunities to work with local resources in a way that we think and hope is beneficial not only to our students' education, but to the benefit of the communities that we work with and serve. So that's it. And let me think, who's next? Ed?
That's right. I'm going to go ahead and jump in here. Oh, we've gone a little too far. I will get Ed unmuted, and we're going to send him his webcam request. Thank you, Dennis. We appreciate it, as always. And we'll get Ed coming in there. Hi, how are you, Ed?
Doing well.
Ed Day is a, you may know him from his 26-year run at Riversdale Mansion as the leader there, but he is also the lead historic preservation officer for Prince George's Parks and Recreation Department. And we are thrilled to have him here to give us an update on the work of the Parks and Rec Department in managing their historic sites. So Ed, I will go ahead and mute myself and turn off my cam and let you take it on.
Right, thanks, Aaron. And you're going to be bringing up the presentation, eh? Good, good, good. Welcome, everyone. Glad to be here with you. I want to thank all those who would have had to work this thing. We've got we've got an easy cleanup tonight compared to how we've had it for the last 20 years or so. We've been doing this thing 25 years. Tonight I want to talk about a lot of the exciting preservation work we've got going on in the department. I want to discuss our historic assets and their liabilities. I want to talk about our 2017 architectural assessment program. I want to talk to you about some of the action we've been taking and examples of our work. I can tell you, Mike Arnold's on this particular video. Mike once said preservation takes a long time, and it's true, it does. It has to be thought out. You have to develop your approach and execute the work. So it's a very calculated process, but in the end, I think it pays dividends, and I'm going to show you some examples of work at the end. To give you an idea of some of the things we have, some of the things the Park and Planning owns, on the left, you'll see some of the properties listed, 46 historic properties. 2 of those National Historic Landmarks Tom talked about earlier, and 100+ archaeological sites. As a point of comparison, the National Park Service owns 27,000 historic structures nationwide. City of Baltimore runs 14 landmarks. The National Trust for Historic Preservation owns 20 properties. They actually partner on 6 others. So we look at ourselves as fitting somewhere between the National Park Service, the City of Baltimore, and the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Related to that, in a county the size of ours, we have so many. If you think about Prince George's County, it's almost half the size of Rhode Island. I imagine that if we were still attached to Montgomery County, we would be the size of Rhode Island. But because we have such a land mass, we have a lot of historic properties. That's a reiteration of the last list, and it can be quite a challenge. And we've gotten some of those properties over the years through grassroots efforts, such as the place I've been working for so long at Riversdale. We call affectionately the little old ladies in tennis shoes. That's our grassroots people, and they're the ones that say, this is an important property and you need to preserve it. And so the first property of the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission was in fact Riversdale in 1949. It became a house museum in the late 80s and opened to the public in 1993, just a year before I got there. But a lot of those resources require maintenance and upkeep and preservation and restoration. It's quite a mixed bag of work that has to be done. We accumulated so many properties that sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming, and we've had to deal with some bad things. I would say that 2 properties we've had to deal with in the past that really started us thinking about how we want to attack this would be Concord and Compton Bassett. Sorry, there you go. How we were going to try and address some of these things after a major catastrophic failure down at Compton Bassett. lost one end of an historic chapel. We started having conversations internally, and I was approached by former Division Chief Larry Corrick for Park Planning and Development to talk about this and how we were going to address this. This is back in 2014, and I was the acting assistant division chief at that point. And we really never had a way to specialize in these properties. We had an internal workforce that helped us out when they could, and what they couldn't do, we would contract out. So we thought about more tightening that up and being specialized and trying to get this work done. So we called a group together, and I think the first thing you have to do when you're going through this type of process is figure out what your liabilities are, and where are we as an organization? When we talked about all those 176 buildings, what are we on the hook for? So we advocated for, and Park Planning and Development advocated for an architectural assessment. This is in 2017, and those photographs under the text here are all the historic structures that we analyzed. And so Davis Buckley, a local architectural firm specializing in historic preservation, and by the way, I think had a couple of University of Maryland graduates working for them as well, set out to analyze what we had. And they came back with a pretty compelling report. They looked at 66 structures and 27 sites, and what they came back with was pretty eye-opening. So when they came back, they identified 3,169 individual items on the properties that they looked at, and they categorized them into priorities. And they were going to do priority A through D, A within a year, and then D is a recurring thing. And Aaron, could you go back? I'm sorry, you run this for me, and one more slide back if you would, if it's possible. Right, and so no, one more forward. Wonderful technology, there we are. So out of all those individual items, we were going to address them. Priority A, one within a year. These are things like leaky roofs, foundation issues. And then as it got to priority D, you're talking about things like there's a wall plate on the wall that could be a fire hazard that needs to be replaced. So there's a pretty concise analysis and allowed us to start making requests for funding, because it's great to have an assessment and know what your liabilities are, but the issue is actually getting some work done and getting some funding. So our new division chief, Chris Fanning, for National Historical Resources Division, came in, and she was undaunted, and she said, well, we really need to look out for these structures. And she went in and she worked with Alvin McNeil, who was an acting division chief at the time. He's now a deputy director. And they put it into our CIP. And so we now have, over the next 5 years, about $21 million to spend on these, architectural issues that we face with our assets. And so we're really looking forward to get into that. Once we get the funding in, then we had to have an action plan. Aaron, if you could advance, that would be great. Thank you. One of the things we did was we hybridized a work group called the Historic Preservation Maintenance Group. We upgraded that. You see in a picture there, Elmer Chavez, Kevin Williams, Gene Yvonne, who's on this call, and Brian Carroll. It should be known, Brian Carroll is actually a sitting Historic Preservation Commissioner in Montgomery County, and he has a Preservation Commission meeting night, so he can't be on this particular seminar. And I think that our Prince George's County colleagues would probably appreciate the fact that he's there, and that he was slated for 4 hours tonight in that meeting. So I'm sure he wishes he was here. Brian's an AIA architect. He's a registered architect, and he helps guide some of our internal work. So again, I should probably have flipped that on the bottom where, based on the assessment, because the money's really important, but we've always put people first. So I wanted to get to them. All right. So some of the other actions we took internally was that the group, Aaron, you could forward that as well, it'd be great. one of the other things we wanted to do was keep this dialogue going, this collaboration going, and get everybody involved in the decision-making process that had a stake in it. So we formed a formal group from the Natural Historical Resources Division, Arts and Cultural Heritage Division, Park Planning and Development, Maintenance Development, and our rental properties. And we meet every week. We discuss issues. We try to help out when somebody may be stuck on something, share resources. There's a picture of everybody there. There's Pia Health on the left. You see me in the background, Jonathan Caudle, Ashley Heyman, who works for CIP, the aforementioned Gina Vaughn, Kristen Monaperto, Brian Carroll, and there's old Greg over there on the right, who works for UMD. And he's been working recently on getting a contract to get all of our roofs done. Anyway, it's a real team effort, and that we meet every week, and then we also meet with our historic preservation section. This is Howard's section, as Tom mentioned, and all their staff, and we get together and share information, and they share that with the HPC. So we feel like we have a line of communication going that is very helpful, and we don't get into too many log jams, and so that is sort of the process there. Let's look at some of the work we've been able to accomplish recently. And I am mindful of my time. Everybody likes before and after pictures. This is at Compton Bassett. We do some work with the University of Maryland. They come down and document those structures. We appreciate that. Before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, we were supposed to do some scanning of some of these things with Stefan, and it didn't happen, but I'm sure we'll get it back on track soon. On the left-hand side, you see a really wonderful smokehouse that looks like, when I walked in there 6 years ago, it looked like it just been left the day before. There were barrels in there, there's a ladder, it's charred black on the inside, but it had some catastrophic failure as well. So recently we've been down there and repointing it and trying to keep it structurally stable. In the middle, you're going to see some images of the Compton Bassett Chapel, a really rare Catholic chapel that experienced the failure. And you can see in the upper right, that whole section that was gone. And then below that, you see it rebuilt with the chimney. I think that is quite remarkable. And then you can look at the doorway. So the doorway is above all the scaffolding at the bottom. You can see one of the elevations of the restored chapel. And that particular project was a collaboration between PP&D and Marcia Oates and Yvonne Johnson, who was in there at the time. I think Glenn Ryan came in later on that project. And we won 2 awards, an AIA, American Institute of Architects Award, as well as American Building Contractor Award for the restoration of that structure. Let's see if we could go to the next here. The next one's Abraham Hall, an African-American historic site. We're placing siding on that. It's really beautiful if you ever get up to Laurel. It's a historically African-American community there. Really beautiful structure, and our Black History program, that is their main office. You can see the new siding and the repaired all exterior trim happening, and it's getting a new roof. The next slide has images of Newton White Mansion, which we were supposed to be at last week for our preservation reception, doing a lot of work out there. It's a rental facility, but it has a really interesting history. It's a favorite spot. I think we did the MNC PPC Christmas holiday gathering there, and there were hundreds and hundreds of people out there. So we want to keep it looking nice. You can see some of the brick repointing we're doing out there. And then the next slide shows a bay window that's being repaired. And you can see down at the bottom that there's been some really terrible rotting going on, and our staff's out there doing that work. And even though the carpenters that I had showed you a picture of earlier worked for the Natural Historical Resources Division, through this new communication we have, we're also helping Arts and Cultural Heritage, which is their property. But we're really trying to break down barriers and not remain silos. The next image shows the Chelsea barn being restored, and Joe Darnell, who used to work with the HPMU, was involved in this. He used to work for maintenance development section. You can see the barn on the left before the restoration. There's the cupolas leaning over to one side. That was taken off, saved, restored, and as you go clockwise around those images, You can see the restoration work and then the product down at the bottom, nearly completion. The image after that shows Riversdale, some of the work that's being done there as well. Right now we're in the middle of a limestone step replacement. We have some architectural engineering work that's going to be done down there. This particular slide talks about some of the work that's been done on the windows, and we actually had to apply under the soffits. There's some dark discoloration there that's actually organic little animals living under there, and we had to get some fungicide. So it's kind of interesting in preservation what you run into. We don't really want to talk about the M word being mold. That's a bad thing. Marietta Mansion follows the Riversdale slide, and we've done some significant work out there recently. We repointed the entire structure. On the left shows sort of a before image. On the right shows it scaffolded up, and them starting on our firm starting on the work out there. So the masonry, the complete repointing of the entire mansion and the law office was accomplished, and that was just accomplished recently. Going down one more slide, you can see some of the work, and this is some of the oohs and ahs. I don't know if everybody can enlarge their screen, but you can see some serious damage and failure beneath the basement window and the first floor window, and then below that you can see what it looks like all tightened up. It's really quite remarkable, and I think if you're into preservation, this is one of the aspects of it you really appreciate. It's kind of a Zen-like feeling when you see this done, and you can look at the window. There's wonderful arches, and then underneath it, it's restored. Of course, there's a chimney cap on the right. That thing was ready to start spitting bricks off of there, and now it's tight again and restored. So that's pretty much my presentation for this evening. There's a lot more to come. We're still building our program. I would say, leaving this with you, our goal is to two examples of that would be to come up with a prioritization model, because we love your historic house, but we really don't want to buy it right now, just in case anybody wants to reach out to me. But we need to have a model that helps us curate and our portfolio a little bit better. And then we also want to get into an educational program, and smarter staff really helps us in the preservation field, because they can help us point out problems before they get too bad. So I hope I kept it short there, Aaron, and thanks everybody.
All right, thank you, Ed. That's fantastic. Well, I get to be the last one on the list here and pull ourselves through this. So I thank you for sticking with us. We only have a couple more minutes before we wrap up. So for those of you who know us, you may know us as Anacostia Trails Heritage Area. We have used the Branding Maryland milestones over the last couple of years. Again, for those of you who may not know us, founded in '97, certified in 2001, with a staff of about 2.5, maybe going to a full complement fairly soon. Let me make sure I press my right buttons here. This is our heritage area, as you can see now, but as Tom mentioned earlier, we are looking at the idea of a boundary amendment. That boundary amendment process, it will look at multiple things, including the potential that other heritage areas could encompass that area of the southern part of the county. What would that look like? How are all these different components? Because the idea of us expanding the boundaries obviously comes with other problems, the administration and such. So a lot of questions still to be answered, and we have some consultants that are working on that. Carolyn Brackett out of Nashville, Tennessee, is doing that work for us currently. Our Heritage Center has been a very successful thing this year. Really, we're talking about kind of over the last year. We had lectures, tours, etc. This image shows the launch of the Hyattsville House Tour video. We just took down our last art exhibit that had to close early due to COVID. And we had to take down our women's suffrage traveling exhibit due to COVID. But we hope as soon as we can be open that we will again have programming in that space, which is located in the Pyramid Atlantic Arts Center in Hyattsville. If you haven't been there and you haven't walked around, I really encourage you to come by and take a look when we're open. We continue to offer a variety of outreach programs. Particularly, we've held these tours, such as the tour of the WB&A line, and then the ongoing relationship we have with the Capitol Trails Coalition and our bike ped work groups. We've gotten ourselves involved with a lot of this trail activity over the years, and we continue to be a big part of that. Of course, COVID has left us with virtualizing. You are one of the examples of this virtualizing the experience. So thank you for being here. I hope you haven't made it yourself all the way through the wine. I've definitely made it through the cheese and crackers so far. But we've had an artist talk with Joel Floyd that's now on our YouTube channel, and we've been launching our 3-minute milestones. If you haven't seen our 3-minute milestones, I encourage you to do it. The Jim Henson one is good. It has my daughter as the narrator, but the other ones are all very good. We're up to 12 right now. We will drop our lucky number 13 on tomorrow, or excuse me, Friday, whatever today is. And we will be talking about the Anacostia River. So that's the next one. And so if you have ideas for these, we'll continue to produce them. We're actually looking now at the idea of how do we create an educational component with them as well. The next thing is current projects. So you can see that list right there. Some of you may have heard, but we will tell everybody. We are working with the Black History Program and folks around the county through the History Consortium to create a Prince George's County Civil Rights Trail. We've identified 10 sites with the Black History Program, developing all the writing and research that's needed for that. We have been working with a couple different people. We have Lee Ryan, who has been helping us on our editing side, and we're about to get to the point where we have some designs. Openbox 9 is our graphic designer on that, so it's been great. The trail towns I'm going to mention for a moment, just because you'll see that come up on the next slide. We actually have tax credits that are available that we're selling, I guess. The milestone markers is a project we're working with the planning assistance for municipalities and counties. And so we have a whole range of ongoing programs. There we go. Obviously, the big thing that we're doing right now is evaluating, as so many people are. We have to figure out what our operations are. We have to figure out how we're funding our operations. A decent portion of our funding comes from our municipal partners, and those municipal partners are getting hit with tax income problems, tax revenues. So we have to evaluate how it is we're going to continue to operate. We are a nonprofit 501c3. While we do that, though, we want to make sure that we're supporting our partners. The Heritage Areas Authority program in the state of Maryland offered emergency grants, of which we had several of them. We will let folks know who those organizations are. We still have a few conversations to have. But we're also looking at what we can do with our mini grants. We exhausted the fiscal 20 mini grants early, so we're looking at what we can do in fiscal 21 to be able to offer mini grants that might help with digitize programs, virtualize programs. How can we work with them? And as I mentioned, this trail tourism aspect is a really big part of what we're going to be doing next. So we were awarded community investment tax credits. And what that means is that if you donate $1,000, let's say, we will give you back a $500 tax credit for your state taxes, so that you can write off some of your tax liability. So that money that we bring in about $20,000, since we have $10,000 to give away, will lead to the creation of a new half-time position dealing with this trail tourism work. They will be doing a whole variety of things, but one of them will be working on trail tourism. If you can imagine, holding workshops for the service industry, and saying, okay, somebody comes into your restaurant, they're looking for a great trail to ride. Where do they go? How do they get to Lake Artemisia? How do they get on the Rhode Island Avenue Trolley Trail? So we're doing that ongoing. So there's plenty of stuff that we're continuing to do. This list is by no means exhaustive, but I really wanted to touch on some of those particular aspects. So that is it for our presentation. I'm going to go back here to my attendees. I'm going to warn you all that I'm going to turn you on, I'm going to request that you turn on your webcams so that we have all of our presenters up for a few moments. And this is a time that if anybody has questions, they can feel free to throw them into our box and answer questions. We didn't really have too many questions. A couple that got answered back of the house during Ed's program. He got himself a couple of shout outs, one from Stacy saying thanks for the beautiful job on Marietta, and one from Mike Arnold responding to your shout out. So thank you for everybody that is out there listening. If you do have questions, now's a good time to ask them. I wanted to ask our panelists here, and they can feel free to jump at this. You know, where do you see historic preservation in Prince George's County? We understand that we're in this COVID situation, and that changes everything. But has historic preservation generally been moving in a positive direction for the county, or have there been major stumbling blocks that really we should be looking at and addressing? Whoever would like to maybe jump at that, feel free to wave at me.
Well, I mean, it depends, Aaron. You know, I'll just jump in real quick. You know, Tom will do with the regulatory aspect of it. I do with the bricks and mortar stuff. You know, so what's the party? I think we have a robust program here. We've got more assets, like you saw in my presentation, and I don't know any other organization like Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission in the country that has that many resources. But I think that in anything, it's about relevance. How does that affect people? How can they enjoy it? What's it mean to them?
Yeah, fantastic. Anybody else have a thought on kind of the future of preservation in Prince George's County?
I guess I have my mic on, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, so, you know, for us, we often operate in kind of a reactive environment. So things come over the transom and we react to them, whether they're development proposals or whether they are applications for historic area work permits. And something that we've done in the past couple of years that I think is good is we've made an effort to identify and get in contact with new owners of historic sites, because one of the real problem areas for us has been when folks will buy a house and they don't know that it's a designated historic site. And I'm happy to say that we've made some real inroads in trying to get to those folks early and not scare them, just kind of make them aware of our presence and that we, you know, ultimately want to help them, both in navigating the historic area work permit process, but also making them aware of the incentives that are available. I've been sort of curious, you know, just in the past couple of months, how whatever economic fallout there is from the pandemic, how that's going to affect things like development proposals, whether you know, real estate developers are going to feel the need to retrench and maybe rethink some of their projects. I don't want to say that an economic downturn is good for preservation, but it does have that effect of you know, perhaps projects that were contemplated for the next year or two maybe are pushed off. So far, we haven't seen any evidence of that, but I think there's probably some lag. And also, you know, whether our population of historic site owners, if they're individually affected by the pandemic or the associated economic problems, whether they are less able to perform deferred maintenance and rehabilitation projects that they otherwise would have been taking on in the near term. So I'm not sure exactly what the answer to that question is, but it's something that I'm interested in seeing play out over the next months.
All right. Well, I've been watching to see if we have any other questions. We had Glenn Ryan said, excellent presentation by everybody. So rewarding for the properties to be well cared for and restored. So thank you. With that, we're coming up on 8:30, and I don't want to take up too much more time. I'm over my limit on cheese and crackers, so I've got to sign off on that. I want to thank Tom. I want to thank Ed. I want to thank Donna. I want to thank Dennis for your time, your participation. I hope that if folks participated here today and if you're interested, please be in contact with any of these folks. Again, we will be posting this in about 36 hours. So I thank you for that. And if you did end up asking a question late on this, we will certainly follow up with you individually on those as well. So look for more to come, and there will definitely, as Donna mentioned, she's got the Historical Society programs are being planned for June, and we're looking for more lectures as well. So all of these webinars will kind of continue. So thank you. Have a great rest of May. Be safe, be well. Thank you all to our panelists, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, everyone.